right, hey, welcome to our first ever Eagles Nest podcast. That's our name that we decided on last week when we had our meeting. But it's our very first episode, and I'm very happy and excited to welcome our very own Mr. Cook. And Mr. Cook is our psychology, history, and economics teacher, if I'm not mistaken. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the very first podcast of the Eagles Nest here. A little bit about myself. Teaching was a career change for me. It wasn't my initial profession. When I left college, I had the fortunate circumstance of having an internship with the Montecito Picture Company. And I just randomly was around at the time that they were filming the two movies, Road Trip and Old School. So I was a production assistant on both of those. And Old School is the one where it was kind of Will Ferrell's breakout movie where he's like streaking naked through the quad and all that stuff. So I worked on the UCLA set as a runner, which meant I took dailies, which is the raw footage they shot that day, back and forth between Montecito and the campus of UCLA. And the fun thing about that for me was every ride was an adventure because I was driving a 1986 Toyota Corolla with 300,000 miles on it. So there was no guarantee I was going to make it to LA or Montecito every time. The thing about the film industry is you're only getting paid when you're working, and you're getting paid decently when you're working, but you have long breaks. So I decided at that point I needed a little more steady paycheck, and I decided to go over to ESPN where I was a production assistant for all the LA operations for ESPN. I worked a lot on the X Games, Rome is Burning, some of the game shows they had. By the time I left ESPN, which was after 2 years, I was writing, editing, I was a cameraman when they needed it, and I was just doing all kinds of things, but it was rough work. I was working 80-hour weeks, and it was rough, and it burnt me out. One of my hobbies, I think we're going to talk about today, is sports. I was completely burnt out on sports because I was just around it all the time, so I decided I needed to make a change, and the change I decided at first was I was just going to go backpack through Europe for 2.5 months. So I went through Europe, found myself, got settled back to reality. Because I was aging in dog years working at ESPN because it was such rough work. And then when I got back, I kind of thought about teaching, but I wasn't ready to make that commitment yet. So I sat in a cubicle for 2 years, and that was the motivation I needed to know that teaching was a profession I wanted to get into.
What kind of cubicle were you sitting, like, for what job?
I was the assistant of the CEO of, at the time, a Fortune 500 company known as Clipper Wind Power, and they were based out of Carpinteria. And I was basically managing his schedule, his travel, all his personal details, all that kind of stuff. And most of my days, I was kind of watching the clock tick by, and every day felt like a millennia.
Right. So that kind of life just wasn't for you, I guess?
No, I wasn't tapping into any of my creativity, and it wasn't really stimulating me or fulfilling me in any way. And that's when I decided to get back to getting my teacher credential and going back to school.
Where did you visit in Europe?
I went all over. So basically we booked the trip where we had our flight into Heathrow and our flight out of Heathrow. And we didn't plan any other part of the trip. We just kind of took it as it went after that.
Spontaneous, I guess?
Spontaneous, okay. Whatever we kind of wanted to do.
And did that kind of, that vacation, did that relax you and kind of get you inspired to be something else?
Absolutely.
Not in the cubicle?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely it did. And visiting all that European history, I was always interested in history and that kind of stuff anyways, so It was a good bridge for me going from things I liked, bridging what I thought was some of my creativity that I wanted to tap into, and putting that into a profession which could utilize all of that.
Well, what ultimately made you want to be a teacher? Because out of all vocations that you could have chosen, how come teaching at a public school was your choice?
Well, as cliche and cheesy as it may sound, it's the honest truth. When I said I just wanted to make a small contribution in a positive way to society, I thought I had the skill set where I could potentially inspire students to pursue interests of their own. And it was my goal to basically make an impact on society, whether it be small or large, in a positive way. And that's where it started.
Was there a teacher back in high school when you were in school that kind of was your inspiration, your role model?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I had a lot of interesting teachers in the social science department at my high school, and I went to a pretty rough, pretty bad high school. Our graduation rate was about 38%. So the freshman class that came in,
Oak Park, right?
Yeah, exactly. So. In fact, we have, if you don't graduate necessarily from Oak Park High School, we have other ways to do that. We've got Oakview and Opus that kind of pick up the slack. I was also going to high school around the time of the LA riots, around the time of Rodney King. School was, where I went to school, was actually more dangerous than it was a stimulating kind of intellectual environment. So I was just trying to get out of high school and get into college as fast as I could, because it was not uncommon for a fist fight to break out during lunch once a week at my high school. In fact, it was more uncommon if a fist fight didn't happen at lunch once a week at my high school. We had a classroom devoted entirely to all of the pregnant high school students that were at our school at any given time, and that number ranged from 12 to like 25 at any given time. So it was a rough, low socioeconomic high school, but in that element, I had a great government teacher, I had a great economics teacher, I had a great world history teacher, and a great U.S. history teacher. So I think that kind of sparked me a little bit without knowing it at the moment.
So when you first went to college, what was your major that you were going in for?
So I actually left Lake Elsinore High School for the University of Kansas 2 weeks after I graduated. I went straight into summer school to try and get a head start.
Okay.
And I was a mechanical engineering, business administration double major, and trying to walk onto the baseball team. And after my first engineering physics test, which I'm sure many of you can empathize with, I think I got something like an 18% on it. And I knew that engineering was probably not the path for me.
Man.
So rather than pay out-of-state fees at the University of Kansas, because I was putting myself through school, I decided to transfer back to California and get my economics degree from UC Santa Barbara.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm playing there too, so.
Excellent. Go Gauchos.
Yeah.
We got a couple Gauchos in this room. Yeah, we've got a Gaucho over there, a Gaucho right here.
Mr. Hall in the audience.
Yeah.
Okay, and Shavi, you had a question?
So I had a question actually about your article at the Huffington Post, or articles. There's two, right?
Yeah,
Do you
absolutely.
want to tell us first of all how you did that and why? What was the? Tell us about
First
the
of all, let me
article.
just add, the article is called Living in a Converted Garage with a Master's Degree.
Correct,
Right? And
yes.
You wrote that back in 2004?
2013.
And, 2013. It was published in 2014.
13.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. So you weren't teaching here at Oak Park at the time, were you?
I was not. In fact, when I got into the teaching profession, it was right in the same year that the economy was falling apart. So right now in my econ classes, we're watching The Big Short. That was basically the
So
time
what,
period when I
2008?
started.
Okay.
And what was happening was I would get laid off in March, rehired in June, and I played that game for the first 7 years of my career. So 4 years here at Oak Park High School, I got laid off all 4 years. 3 of the years, they were very certain, like, we're bringing you back, but we have to go through the formal process of waiting until this date to do so. And it just got really stressful. You can't plan your life for more than a year at a time. Plus, living in this community, at my starting salary at this school district was $48,000 a year, and I was paying $2,000 rent a month.
Right.
Damn.
So I decided that if I was going to make a change, I needed to do it, and that's when I decided to move to Denver and give Colorado a try. But the financial crisis chased me to Colorado as well, and I got laid off both years I was in Colorado. And in Colorado, they don't have the same law protection for teachers that they do in California. I got laid off my second year in Colorado in front of my class of 37 with a piece of paper brought in by a vice principal.
God.
Wait,
Oh
so
my
you
God.
walked into class while you were teaching. And
I'm in the middle of an introduction to business class, 37 students. He hands me a piece of paper, and as a teacher, we get pieces of paper all the time, and it usually has a student's name on it, and we distribute it, or you're required to sign something. So I'm in the process of signing it. It's a very short paragraph, and in it, it's using legal language about my position being redundant, therefore we're not going to bring you back. And rather than wait until after school or lunch or any other time, they did this in front of a class of 37.
Colorado's wild.
Yeah,
Oh, God.
absolutely.
how'd you take it? Like you
Not
were,
well.
you were like,
Not well.
What the hell is this?
Yeah. At that point, I decided.
And the lecture, like.
Yeah. At that point, I decided I was going to come back to California, so I kind of lit up the administration from that point moving forward. I wasn't the only one that was put through that process, and in fact, it cost the principal his job the following year just from a lack of leadership and a lack of even decorum.
So they didn't
Right,
notify
right.
you at all about the.
I had
There's
no
no
idea
warning.
that this was even
Right.
coming
Okay.
down the line. And in California, they have to legally let you know by March 15th so you can look for another job.
Right.
Right.
Because if you wait until June, then you've missed the job market for that next year.
Man.
So I know that the article also discusses like student loans
Mm-hmm.
and how you were like there were 2 articles, I believe.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. So you talked about student loans and how they were like impacting you as you tried to, go through your like career and how it's been following you ever since college.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. So I'm the kind of person where if I'm going to write an article about complaints that I have, I also want to write an article about what I perceive are solutions. I don't want it to be just kind of person that just complains about things. I want to offer solutions. So those are the bookends to those articles. So in 2013, that was the 6th year of my teaching career. I had been laid off all 6 of those years. The second 2 came from Colorado, and I was kind of finding myself in a position where I was stuck because I needed to earn a certain level of income in order to even consider paying off the student loans. And it put me in a pretty bad situation when I had to move back to California, because when I moved back to California, I didn't have a job. So I was renting my friend's guest house, which was a converted garage. So it was a garage, essentially. It had no insulation, no air conditioner, no heater, no kitchen. And for that, even that was hard to pay rent on because it was in Culver City, which is in Los Angeles. So I found myself, just reconsidering everything. And the problem I perceive with student loans is that the price of college since 1980 has gone up by 600%, and that's adjusting for inflation. So everybody, all the students sitting in this classroom will pay 6 times as much for an education as your parents did. In addition to that, we have no manufacturing sector in the United States any longer, which used to be a nice middle class job, is to go into construction or to go into some kind of manufacturing industry, automobile industry. So now what we have is kind of a devil's bargain of you have to go to college in order to make it into the American economy, but the price of college makes it so difficult to pay for that you're kind of under the boot hill of that thing as long as you have that debt. And we've got a developing debt crisis with student loans that has now surpassed credit card debt, auto loan debt, and it's hyper concentrated into basically 2 generations. Your age of basically 18 to my age, the basic age of 40. So it's $1.3 trillion right now. 40% of those loans are in a state of default or deferment. And what that also means is all of that debt is highly concentrated into 2 generations. And because they have that level of student loan debt, they're not able to participate in the economy by buying a house and accruing equity, or buying a house and starting a family. So it's kind of stunting the growth of the economy. It's stunting the growth of a couple generations.
Right.
And honestly, that's the economy and the circumstances that you guys are going to have to inherit.
Right. So most of us I see in the audience are seniors. What advice do you think you can give us for going to college and paying for college and having to deal with student debt later in our lives?
Well, certainly apply for every single scholarship you can get your hands on, from $20 to $500 to $10,000, because there's billions of undistributed scholarship money. Apply for grants, but honestly, coming from a high socioeconomic community and a high socioeconomic school like Oak Park, most of you will not qualify for the lower socioeconomic scholarships that are available. But coming from Oak Park gives you an advantage to where you go to school. I wish I had a magic bullet of advice, but the way our current system is set up is you're forced to go to college, essentially, if you want to be successful. It is very expensive, and because everybody has to do it in order to be successful, there's no reason for the universities to lower their costs. So what I would advise to you is, if you're not going to a specific school for a specific reason, and it is a very expensive school, be careful as to how much student loan debt you take on. Now, if you get into an Ivy League school, you should pay whatever the price is to get into an Ivy League school, because your success is almost guaranteed at that point. But if you are going to go to Cal State Northridge to be a communications major, that might be too expensive for what the job is going to be waiting for you when you get out of college. If you're going to go, my biggest mistake is I went to a graduate school that was private, and my private master's degree cost me $60,000, whereas Mr. Hall went to UC Santa Barbara for his master's degree and teaching credential, and I think it was probably a third of that cost, if I'm not mistaken. So there you go. So one of the problems was I had been working full-time already, so I had to go to night school, and the only offer I could take to go to night school was to go to one of these private universities. Very, very expensive. Beware of online universities, because they're exorbitantly expensive, and they tend to juke their own stats by saying we have job placement of this percentage. But what they've gotten in trouble for, a lot of them, is that they create shell companies that will hire you for a couple months so they can increase their job placement statistics when really those are kind of false statistics. So if you have to take on student loan debt, be wary of the amount and do the simple math problem. For me, one of the things was I was sitting in a room of 25 individuals. We were all signing the paperwork together, and I'm looking around going, I know this is a lot of money, but I guess if we're all doing it, there must be a light at the end of this tunnel. Of those 25, only 3 of us are still teaching.
Oh my God.
So imagine taking on $60,000 of student loan debt and also not getting a career out of it, which is the hardest debt to pay off, is when the debt you took on doesn't land you in a career where you were. But during 2013, I was considering whether or not teaching was going to be my future profession, just because of how much debt I took on and how incapable I was of paying it off. And I still have about $27,000 of student loan debt. I still have about $16,000 of credit card debt, all from over 10 years ago. I've done the math. For my $60,000 of debt that I've taken on, will pay $120,000 back by the time it's all paid off. Double the principal. It'll be double the amount.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy.
So the interest rate is crazy, huh?
Well, the thing about the interest rate is they're going to charge you the maximum legal amount, which right now is 6.8%. But there is a fun little thing waiting for everybody in this room. Graduate school now has been approved to increase the interest rate to 9.8%.
No.
We're all screwed.
What?
So if you want to go to graduate school, they can now charge you almost the rate of a credit card to do that. 9.8%. Yeah. And it's going to price a lot of people out of school.
Yeah,
and in fact, you guys will pay more for your senior year of college than you will for your freshman year of college. That's almost a guarantee.
Well, I want to move to shift to a little more fun topic.
A lighter note.
Sure. Yeah. What, nuclear warfare or the climate?
So what do you do on the weekends? Like, what's your go-to hobby?
I love sports, music, concerts, video games, reading, being outdoors, all that good stuff. So it kind of depends on the season we're in. If it's beach season, like a lot of outdoor activities, stuff like that, I'm back to loving sports like crazy, especially football and baseball. Although I do have some ethical concerns with football these days, in a lot of regards. You know, I used to watch football in a way where it was like, oh, did you see that monster hit? That's great. Now I cringe when I see some of that stuff. Right. And I myself played football for 9 years. I have some concerns about my own youth and doing a lot of head knocking growing up and what that might result in as far as like CTE and what might be happening to my brain over time, long term. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. You know, it just kind of comes and goes with whatever. I like hanging out with friends. Mr. Hall is a great friend of mine. We spend a lot of time together on the weekends. And not anything out of the unusual, really.
Favorite book?
Favorite book ever, fiction, would be The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Absolutely love that book. It's very dark. It's an unexplained post-apocalyptic kind of situation where a father and a son are just trying to make it through this post-apocalyptic setting. Nonfiction, it would probably be any of Michael Lewis's books in regards to either financial crises. Probably my favorite of his is The Tour Through the New Third World, which was a book about how many of the European countries were affected by the financial crisis because of what our banking industry essentially did to their banking industry.
Right. Okay. Favorite band?
Favorite band of all time?
Of all time.
All time.
Would probably be a band that you guys probably haven't heard of. It's a prog rock band called the Mars Volta, but I cut my teeth growing up on Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Metallica. Current bands that are my favorite would be like Thrice and Grandson. I also like a lot of hip hop. Kendrick is great. Run the Jewels is one of my favorites. I tend to try and stay proactive in identifying new music.
I think we can tell in our classes. Like, there's music that's ranging from like acoustic to like hardcore, like metal. It's a really large like spectrum. Like, where do you get that? Like, how do you have that really wide range?
So I read certain music websites like Pitchfork and Metacritic and AllMusic, and they'll always talk about what the new music is coming out, and I will always give something a try. I'll always give something a listen. And if it strikes my interest on the first listen, I'll give it several listens. So when I was growing up, you had to invest in music. So you had to kind of pick a lane. You had to pick, this is my genre, because I can't afford to like all music, right? Exactly,
right,
yeah.
Right, so
and in fact, we even used our CDs like assets. We'd go trade them back into the store for store credit, and I could trade in 3 CDs and get 1 brand new one. So my music taste growing up was very pinpointed into alternative and early metal and stuff like that. And if I'm going to be completely honest, you may not see it from looking at me, but my #1 genre that I like to listen to by myself is really hardcore metal.
I think
really hardcore metal. Yeah.
Give me an example, like what kind of band?
Oh gosh, Dillinger Escape Plan, Behemoth, Bloodiest.
Do you have a favorite song that we can?
We can sample.
If you want, I don't know if you're ready for this. I don't know if you guys are ready for this.
What's it called?
Why don't you put in August Burns Red?
August.
And pick the song Martyr.
Sounds hardcore. That
it is.
Sounds hardcore.
It is, yeah.
All right,
I love guitars. I love guitar-driven music, and I really enjoy quite a bit things that are guitar heavy, because I do play guitar myself.
All right, so
there you go.
Here it is.
And it's screamo. Just prepare yourself for that.
Wow.
You all right, Joshua?
Yeah, I was making sure the audio.
It's hardcore. So hardcore.
My God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
I'm gonna interrupt real quick. And
Sure.
I'm gonna bring the computer over your head.
Okay.
We're running on.
You got it.
So Angus. Can
Oh
you
yeah, of
real quick?
course. Sorry about the interruption.
Sorry.
No problem.
Sorry.
You're all good. Here we go.
Let's
Next time we charge the computer. Alright.
You got enough range there?
I'll just be back here.
Sounds good.
All right, no worries. Let's go.
All right.
How are we doing on time? Okay,
It
so
is
we did promise the viewers that we're gonna do a little quick round of cook trivia for some cook buffs. Right, that's why you guys came here today, isn't it? All right, so how about this? You're gonna make a question and something about you. Doesn't have to be something that you've said in the podcast today. It can be anything, and you give them two to 4 options.
Okay.
To choose.
All right.
And then whoever raises a hand and answers it,
Multiple
cook buff
choice.
for you.
Multiple choice.
Okay, multiple choice. Make it easy for you.
All right. So since it's just fresh on my mind,
Literally anything about you.
okay. So my branch to enjoying metal of all genres started with one band. So what do you think that band is? Was it, or actually, Cam? Sounds like you got
He's
the
like,
answer.
no
what
options.
is it?
Cameron knows.
You
All
can
right,
answer.
gotta
Yeah,
give
go
me-
ahead.
Don't give me the options.
Okay, so my options are, and keep in mind I'm talking about the metal genre here. So Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Metallica, or Boyz II Men.
I'm just going to guess Metallica.
That is absolutely correct. Yes.
That's
Cam
money
is
right
in. Yes.
there.
Absolutely.
He'll pay you in class. So
Yes,
I
so
owe
you come
all
see
right?
me in class, and
Yes.
I'll give you some cook
All right,
bucks for
next
that.
question.
Next question. What do you think my favorite story-based video game of all time is? Is it any of the BioShock games? Any of the Drake adventure games? Uncharted series, yes. The Last of Us? Or let's go with Kid Icarus.
Chris.
The Last of Us is correct. So I'm
Right, hey,
quite looking
Hey.
forward
There you go.
to The Last of Us 2,
you
which
go.
I think is due early spring of next year.
Yeah, the new one.
Yeah.
Right now. Uh-huh.
Yep. Okay, another trivia
Yeah,
question?
let's do 1 or 2 more. Yeah. for
Okay,
sure.
sounds good.
And we'll give it up with questions at the end.
If Cormac McCarthy is my favorite fiction writer besides Stephen King, because I read every Stephen King book.
You read the whole It.
Whole-
Oh my
The whole,
In fact,
you know,
yeah.
the whole it.
Yeah. In fact, it came out when I was in 7th grade, and I think I read all of it in a month, and I think it's 1,100 pages. Yeah,
Jeez.
yeah.
It's a
In
brick,
fact, I used to get
guys.
in arguments with my high school English teachers trying to have an alternative assignment for myself, because as everybody was reading like Little Women, I was like, can I read it and do a report on that? Because it's 1,200 pages long and Little Women's 200 pages long, so I'm clearly doing more work, and no English teacher would give me the alternative assignment. So what I ended up doing most of the time is just not reading Little Women and reading it instead. And then just winging it on the test. I'm sure nobody in this classroom has ever done anything like that, right? Yeah.
Definitely not. So what are our options here?
So Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite new writers, although Stephen King is still writing. what was Cormac McCarthy's first book, which was the book I read that got me into his kind of world?
Can't be looking it up. You can't be looking this up. Okay, I want to see
Was it A, Blood Meridian? Was it B, No Country for Old Men? Was it C, The Road? Or was it D, The Counselor?
Anybody got a guess? Diego, I see your hand. What's up?
Not No Country for Old Men. It's not The Road, because that came out recently.
Okay, 2 down.
The Counselor was a movie script he wrote, so it wasn't actually a book.
So it's whatever the first one.
Hey, Blood Meridian is correct. Yes, very good. Yes.
Woo! Yes. Okay.
Excellent.
So I think we'll have to end it there. Let's give it up for any viewer questions. Any questions you guys got for Mr. Cook before we end the podcast today?
And Angus, make sure you repeat the question into the mic.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, Cameron.
So what kind of got you into teaching psychology?
That's a good question.
So what got me into teaching psychology is actually very interesting. What happened was as I was transferring from mechanical engineering into economics, I needed some electives to fill in my schedule, and those electives tended to be film and psychology classes. So I took 8 psychology classes in college, ranging from your basic Psych 101 all the way to the upper level, like abnormal psychology types of classes, and I just fell in love with it. And then I kind of just put that, off to the side for a little while, and then when basically what I decided this summer, when given the opportunity, because Mr. Appel left to go be an administrator at Moorpark, they offered me AP Psych, and I said, give me 48 hours to think about it, because taking on an AP class is daunting. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of extra work, a lot of time, because you're kind of building the train tracks as the locomotive is going full speed in 2 feet away. And because I had such a love for AP Psychology and psychology that I took in college, I decided to take on the endeavor, and I'm having a great time with it. I'm having a lot of fun trying to make it as interesting for students as the classes were for me when I took them.
Mr. Cook, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's been a pleasure.
And
thank you guys.
Everybody for coming
on the show. Thank you very much. Yeah,
we'll
of course.
See you guys in 2 weeks for our next podcast.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.